So the project for integrating spirituality, law, and politics, actually, in part, it came out of, if I put it in one historical frame, it's that the critical legal studies movement in law, which was the left critique of legal culture that came out of the 60s and that many law professors were involved in the 70s and 80s, had a wing to it, of which I was a part, that was an attempt to overcome or critique the alienation of law that I was just describing earlier. And in part, in my own personal case, actually, I became friends with and co-workers with Michael Lerner, Rabbi Michael Lerner, who started Tikkun magazine, and I became associate editor of Tikkun, along with being a law professor at New College in the 80s and 90s, this is. And there we worked on what became known as the politics of meaning, which essentially was that social change politics needed to focus on the meaning of human interaction and the longing for a different kind of world, a world based on love and mutual recognition rather than a world based on self-interest and social separation. And that, for me, naturally led to a synthesis that we had to go beyond critical legal studies, which remained locked in the category of critique of liberalism and traditional legal doctrine, but didn't put forward an alternative or different way of imagining law and legal culture. So out of Tikkun and the first Politics of Meaning conference was in 1996 in Washington, D.C., and there were about 2,000 people there. And there were about 50 lawyers that came together out of that group, and we decided to form a group called the Project for Integrating Spirituality, Law, and Politics, because we were trying to bring the spiritual dimension of social healing and mutual recognition together with recognizing that what was needed was a large-scale social change, even if it happened piecemeal, a transformation of all social relations so that a world in which love was the dominant ethos could become safe, could become conceivable, a cooperative world in which people made housing, food, and other necessities of life in a context of cooperation and affirmation, and also created culture with that ethos. And to accomplish that required a more fundamental transformation than just improving the legal profession and just achieving spiritual self-realization for the isolated person. So out of the Politics of Meaning conference in 1996, we formed a group that became the Project for Integrating Spirituality on the one side and politics on the other with transforming law and legal culture. And we started we had some summer camps. Anybody can do this. You know, we rented the Marconi Center, and we took 3 or 4 days. I think you came to the Marconi Center conference, yeah. We developed some readings, and then we invited people who came to that conference to come to the lawyers who had come to that conference and law teachers to come to, first actually at Sleeping Lady in outside of Seattle, Washington. We had our first meeting. Then we had a later summer camp at Marconi Center outside of San Francisco. And lawyers and law teachers from around the country came to that, probably 20 to 30 to each, maybe more, maybe closer to 40 at each one. And out of that came monthly conference calls in which we initially met to try to help each other develop projects that would advance a spiritual, political, activist conception of law. And then as these have gone on over the years, we've also, some years, used them as monthly opportunities to hear people, many of whom I'm sure are on this website, interviewed for this website, speak about their ideas on a monthly basis. We agreed that the calls will only be an hour because everybody's got family life and only a limited amount of time for conference calls. But if you call in once a month at this time, you hear a speaker for 20 minutes, then we all participate in discussion for about 40 minutes, and then that's it for that call. That's kind of the framework that we've worked in. National conferences, sometimes participating with other large-scale groups like the Network of Spiritual Progressives, and summer camps and phone calls. We also have done some local chapters, the most successful of which has been the New York chapter under the leadership of Nanette Shore, a family lawyer who's head of family services in New York Legal Aid. And she has organized a group a long time now, 10-year-old group in New York City that still meets once a month for dinner and does support events and its own small discussion events and small conferences in New York. And we've had one in San Francisco that met primarily as a discussion group. The person I talk most about is Doug Amar and the Georgia Justice Project. I know you've interviewed Doug for this series. But Doug's practice is striking because it's based on the idea that the lawyer-client relationship should be seen as a permanent relationship in which the encounter with the client is a fully human encounter in which the law firm that is engaging with someone who needs help is making a real commitment to the success of the other person's life, not just to trying to solve a single legal problem for them. So Doug's framework of locating his practice across from Martin Luther King's Ebenezer Baptist Church, and therefore participating in a spiritual center of Atlanta, rather than, for example, from the point of view of my being a law professor, rather than the model of what the law student thinks of as being on the 35th floor of an anonymous building in a downtown, which is really the model that is put forward to law students. Doug's model is no, we locate a community-based practice in the center of the community and are engaged with the surrounding community life. So Doug has the linkage to churches. I think one church in particular that is connected to the Georgia Justice Project in Atlanta, that is a kind of spiritual support for the work of the Georgia Justice Project. But then the idea of a long-term commitment to the client that's based on love and on recognizing the full humanity of the client, and entering into a contract with the client in which a commitment is made that the client, if the client is represented by the GJP, they will work in the landscaping business in order to get their economic life together and learn a skill so that they can be successful in the world as a whole. And also, since that's a criminal practice primarily, and also the Georgia Justice Project will represent them in their criminal case and will stand up for them as human beings. I think that's what Doug's practice manifests, that all lawyers should see themselves as moral representatives of the best in the person whom they're standing with. I think Doug really carries that beautifully, so that you sense, his clients, I know, feel that if Doug is their lawyer, their whole self is being stood up for, and their dignity as a human being is being put forward in public to others in a way that will lead others to see themselves in the client, and with a sense of real empathy and compassion for the client's life circumstances and for the client's effort. And one of the great things about that's part of this, about Doug's practice, is it expects something from the client. It expects the client to rise to that level of human commitment. The commitment that Doug and his lawyers and staff will make to that client, the client also must make to being in the world through the representation that Doug provides. So all of that is a transformative way of thinking of the lawyer-client relationship that we put forward as a model to others and say, this is how people should practice.